What was the biggest bullet you've dodged? Viewer edition. Story 1. I might have stopped a shooting from happening at my college. This was almost a decade ago. I was going to a community college in the city. I was taking a lot of art classes at the time and had a lot with this really nice guy who was a Desert Storm vet. I got to know him pretty well. He went through a rough time with PTSD but was sober now and decided to use his GI Bill to go back to college. It definitely seemed like things were going pretty well for him. One day he shows up late to one of our classes and he's clearly been drinking. He starts ranting to me about how this guy in the college's Veteran Services Department royally screwed him over. I don't remember all the details, but it had to do with other benefits he was receiving and how he was going to be homeless now because his landlord wasn't willing to wait any longer for rent. So this friend starts telling me how he wants to kill this guy. Something about the way he said it made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. But I tried to rationalize that a lot of people say they want to kill someone while venting, so I asked him to repeat the story to me. I wanted to try to get details. I wanted to know if he was actually planning to kill someone or was just drunkenly venting. Also, I wanted to know the identity of this guy he was threatening. I remember him telling me exactly who it was. I was scared to actually ask him if he was thinking about killing the guy. I really had no idea what I was doing and didn't want to set him off. So I asked him to repeat the story again. He told it 3 times. Each time it became clearer that he was planning to murder this dude. The last time he told the story, he said he was going to go home after class, get his Glock, and come back to school and shoot the MRFer between the eyes. And he'll kill anyone who tries to get in his way. It was so surreal at that moment. I knew I had to go to the police. Luckily, we had some police officers that worked on campus. I needed to figure out how to get to the security office without alerting this guy. Since class was almost over, I decided I would go immediately after. Once it ended, he said he'd walk with me to my next class. Since I wasn't planning to go to my next class but to speak with the police, I had to find a way to separate myself from him. I didn't want him to think anything was off, so I told him I needed to use the bathroom and I'd see him tomorrow. I went into the bathroom, waited a few minutes, and then went back out. Luckily, he was gone, so I went straight to security and spoke with the police officers. I started shaking so bad at that point. I no longer had to hold my composure in front of this guy. To this day, I have a really strong feeling he was going to go on a rampage later that day. I knew he had more than just a Glock at home. And the more I spoke with him, the more I got the feeling he already believed everything in his life was over. All he could think about was getting revenge and didn't care at all about collateral. That is absolutely terrifying, and I think really good that you did go and report that because... yeah, no matter what you might think of police and stuff like that, you can't just let someone shoot up a school. You need to report something like that if you have concerns, because that is just not a risk that we should be taking these days. Story 2. Early in my Navy career, 1991, working in engineering on my first ship. Was promoted that night to shift supervisor, which was awesome. Later that night, however, we suffered an equipment failure that temporarily crippled the ship, dead in the water. As we were in the Persian Gulf at the time, this meant we were in big jeopardy until we got things fixed. Took several hours, but things got fixed and we got moving again. Next morning, I got called in to answer questions as an official investigation was ordered by the captain. Turned out I was the last person to be interviewed. The investigation officer asked if I needed to review my log sheet to refresh my memory of the previous night, but I declined. In one long take, I tell him everything from when I assumed the watch to when I was removed from my workspace. The investigating officer takes some notes, asks a few questions for clarification, then drops the bomb on me. First, he tells me that as far as he was concerned, I was the only person he'd interviewed who told him the truth. Then he tells me that everyone else involved in the incident he had spoken to was trying to foist the blame on me, even though the incident had nothing to do with me or my workspace. Guess who the lowest-ranking person involved was? My department was actually pushing for me to be charged with sabotage and treason over the incident to hide what turned out to be a long pattern of derelict behavior by engineering senior enlisted and officers. The investigating officer turned over his findings to the captain, who seemed to realize that bringing almost the entire senior engineering staff up on charges would not only render the ship at least temporarily inoperable, but also end her career for what amounted to a department-wide conspiracy taking place right under her nose. No charges were ever filed against anyone actually responsible for the incident. The department found ways to screw me over left and right after that, but I did dodge the bullet of a court-martial that could easily have led to life imprisonment or even possibly my execution. Okay, seriously, screw those other people who were going to let you take the fall for this in such a way that you could have been arrested or executed. That's ridiculous. Like, someone letting someone take the blame for a bad job screw up, that might, get him in trouble. That's still not cool, but a little more understandable. But to be like, nah, we'll let the new guy take the fall. He'll be the one executed, maybe. Nope. No reasonable good human being should ever do that. Story 3. Story 7 reminds me of a similar incident that happened at my university while I was waiting outside of a classroom with my friends for one of our classes to start. This area is around a 4-story building and gets a lot of students hanging around since a lot of classes let out from this building at the same time, so all the subsequent classes start at the same time. We're all standing or sitting around waiting for the other classes before us to let out, and there's a guy on the far wall standing maybe 7 feet from under the walkway above by himself, looking at his phone. Out of nowhere, there's this super loud metallic clang and a splash of water. We all look to where the noise came from, and we see the guy who was on the far wall standing a foot away from a completely exploded metal water bottle, one of the refillable ones. Based on the size of the bottle remains and the amount of water on the floor, I could only guess it was one of the huge 64-ounce ones completely filled with water. The guy and everyone else is frozen in shock of what just happened. Then, the sudden realization hits that if that bottle had connected with his head, he would have been seriously injured or worse. We all take a few minutes to ask if he's okay. Thankfully, he's fine and just a bit shaken from what happened. We then try to figure out where it fell from. We look up and see that everyone on the 2nd and 3rd floor walkways are looking up as well, and we see a girl walking down the stair towards us all. She just walks up, grabs the remains of the bottle, and walks off without even saying anything. As it turned out, based on what a person on the 4th story walk told us, she had filled her water bottle at a refill station and put it on the railing to screw the lid back on. She turned to look at something and her backpack knocked it off the railing and down it went. When we heard how bad the situation was, we realized that the guy wouldn't have just been injured, he'd have more than likely been dead. For the rest of the quarter, whenever I saw him waiting for that class, he was always sitting at a bench on the other side of the building's courtyard. How does the woman say nothing? I know that she was probably, embarrassed to a degree that probably none of us can fully understand, because she had to have realized she almost killed someone. And so I'm sure there's the embarrassment of, just get it and get out of here. But at the same time, you almost killed someone. You gotta say something. I don't care how embarrassed you are. Be like, I can't believe that happened. I'm so sorry. Are you okay? Is there anything I can do? Woof. Story 4. I can relate to story 24. In September of 2019, I was desperate for any kind of job so I'd be able to stop working the fast food job I hated. But no company wanted to touch me because I was fresh out of college and had only worked minimum wage jobs before then. The fact that I lived an hour away from the nearest city at the time didn't help matters, but I didn't want to move until I found a good job. Vicious cycle right there. I eventually got an interview at a place that sold tractor parts to farmers that was only 20 minutes from my parents' place for a receptionist position. Everything went smoothly and they told me they'd call me to let me know of their decision in 2 weeks. But a month passed by without a single call. The bullet dodge turned out to be twofold. First off, apparently the owner of the place put on a kind face to customers and interviewees, but regularly verbally abused his staff. From what I heard later, receptionists rarely lasted longer than 6 months at that place. Secondly, only a couple months later, I got hired for a position that was actually in my field of study, and it was one that could be done completely remotely. If I hadn't quit due to the boss's harassment before March, I almost definitely would have been laid off from that receptionist job when the pandemic started. Instead, I got a job that paid pretty well with fantastic coworkers that lasted until the end of 2021, an apartment in a pretty big city, and got my foot in the door to my industry, which made it much easier to find a new job when I needed one later down the line than if I had no experience. It's wild to think about how much worse my life would have been if I'd actually been hired there, even though the rejection was a little soul-crushing at the time. Story 5. I almost married the father of my first child. He proposed right after I found out I was pregnant. I assumed no one would want me after that, and I didn't want my child to grow up without a dad. I stayed with him until the baby was born, but left him shortly after due to a few bad things that sent up red flags. Him talking about duct taping our child to a chair as punishment was one of them. The baby crying the second he entered the room was another. Fast forward to 20 years later, I found out that he just recently had 2 kids with another woman who were under 3. The reason I found out is because he killed them both, set his house on fire, then shot himself. I felt both relief that it wasn't me and overwhelming sadness at the way those babies' lives ended. They deserved better. Story 6. After breaking up with someone who I hadn't realized was toxic, a lot of things became clear to me. Using me for money, controlling me, isolating/demanding all my time and energy, among other things. But the real kicker was finding a secret Tumblr blog my ex had about 2 weeks after the breakup that was devoted to fantasies of killing and cannibalizing your lover. We had been together for almost 4 years, and I had absolutely no clue about that particular fantasy. Needless to say, I'm fairly certain I dodged a major bullet. I'm okay with people having a lot of their fantasies that I don't understand. Different people have different things. I try not to yuck anyone's yums, but fantasizing about killing and cannibalizing your lover, I just don't know if I can wrap my head around that one. That's terrifying. If I found that out about someone that I loved, I'd be like, I'm very scared of you now. I don't like this. Story 7. Concerning story 27, I had a similar thing happen to me. I was in college and decided to skip a class to play video games with my roommate and some friends. Later that night, I checked my schedule and saw that I missed a midterm exam. I start freaking out, trying to come up with an excuse to tell the professor. I then ran into someone with whom I take the class, and they tell me that the professor inexplicably pushed the exam back a week. I think that was the moment I stopped effing around and treated college a little more seriously, LOL. Story 8. While I was going through my divorce, a guy I got my haircut from, and I had a conversation with him about it. He gave me the advice of either pulling the trigger and getting the divorce, or wait until she could make up more excuses. I pulled the trigger and got the divorce so I could move on. It might not sound like I dodged a bullet, but I dodged giving her half my stuff she had no interest in to begin with. Story 9. Senior year of high school in the US, I applied to a private art/design school. I told my cousin about it, and he told me that this place is a scam and is facing a huge scandal. I was like, it's too late to apply to other universities, and I didn't take the ACT or SAT. So I went to a community college and then transferred to a state university. This university was known for its amazing art and design department. A lot of graduates end up working in Fortune 500 companies. It was a great school. Kind of strict, but I learned so much. If I went to that art design school, I would have been in debt for years and years. Folks, there's nothing wrong with community college. Seriously, it can be a lot cheaper. It can oftentimes keep you, closer to home if you want. And it gives you time to figure out what you want to do, because jumping straight from high school into some of the big universities can be a lot for folks. There's nothing wrong with going to a community college. It's extremely valid, and I've known tons of people who started at community colleges and have amazing jobs right now. And then you have people like me who started in community college, and I don't know what you'd call what I do, so I don't know, take what I say with a grain of salt. Story 10. Concerning story 14, at least the seatbelt comments he made afterward, hits home really hard. We lost a fellow student in May 2022, a week before the last day of school. He got into a car accident going too fast around a corner and ended up flipping the car into a ditch. He didn't have a seatbelt on, but my two other friends who were in the backseat of his car had theirs on. They survived with minor injuries, but my friend had been thrown through the windshield and was halfway through it when police arrived. He was dead when police got there. He will be graduating this year. It's still weird to not see him around school or hear him cheering through the hallways, whether it was him being excited or he just wanted to be loud. Everyone knew the kid. He was the kind of guy that everyone knew about and was very nice to everyone. I knew that guy since 6th grade when he loved school and he welcomed me amazingly. I wear my seatbelt now even if I'm not the one in the driver's seat. I hate it if I can't wear one, and I hate when other people don't wear one. Just remember, wear your seatbelts. They will definitely save your life. Story 11. Some people in my class invited and persisted for me to go with them to go to the school in a closing time, saying stuff like, "Oh, if they see us, we'll just say we're doing a school project." Turns out, all of them, 7 students, got expelled from the school because they were actually trying to destroy private property that was inside the gymnasium. There was just a guy that was living in there. I think he had some mental problems that some students apparently loved to just take advantage of him, throwing rocks and accidentally letting the soccer ball go into his roof, so they got caught trying to destroy his house. It was a small wooden house. Dude probably was living in some extreme poverty. And then they got expelled right after it, even the people that didn't agree to destroy stuff. I'm still glad I didn't go with them. Story 12. Story 33 from the original video was basically what happened to me, though I didn't get as lucky to have nothing broken. Walked across the street while deeply in thought. Happens to me sometimes that I am just so lost in thought I don't even realize where I'm walking, and got hit by a speeding car. Went over the roof, hit my shoulder into the windshield and smashed it, did a flip, and ended the thing with the perfect superhero landing. Kneel down, weight in front of my feet, one hand on the ground. And I had absolutely no idea what just happened. The guy hitting me had stopped his car and came running over, and some people had been standing off to the side and were now running towards me. I stood up, everything felt fine. Stepped aside and talked about that incident with the bystanders. I told them I didn't need to go to the hospital and started to come down from the adrenaline when suddenly a burst of the most extreme pain I can remember shot through my left shoulder and chest area. I only remember saying, "Yep, I need hospital," before my legs gave out and I lost consciousness. Woke up like 6 hours later in the hospital, my wife on my bedside and some harsh pain in the shoulder and an otherworldly headache. Broken shoulder blade and 2 ribs on the left side.
You know, I understand that you're saying that you dodged a bullet because you very easily could have died from that. And I'm glad that you didn't and it was only some broken bones and stuff. But it is just funny to be like, oh, I dodged a bullet. I got hit by this car and broke a shoulder blade and 2 ribs. Woo!
Story 13. When I was younger, it was the summer before 8th grade, so I was like 12? I'm not sure. I was at a summer overnight Girl Scout camp. It was the last day of the week, and I'd spent the whole morning cleaning out my shared cabin with the girls in my group, so I was pretty tired. We finished before the cabin next to us did, so I was sitting on the ramp behind the cabin near the door as I waited for the counselor to call us to leave. It had been storming all the previous night, and everything was still drenched, and the spot I was in was one of the few with some cover, so it was dry. I'm not sure why, but at one point I decided to move further down this ramp, about 5 feet or so away from the door. That area actually was wet, so I don't know why I moved. I just did. Maybe a minute or so after I moved, I heard a loud crack, and I turned around just in time to see a huge, widthwise, not length, branch fall from the nearby tree, landing exactly where I had just been sitting, and literally exploded on contact, like it went from 1 piece to at least 10. The sound had scared me so much I bolted to sit under the shelter we had at the center of camp for crafts and stuff instead. It took almost until the end of day when my parents had come to pick me up that I realized that if I hadn't moved, the branch would have hit me, and given how the impact was hard enough to obliterate said branch, I'm pretty sure I would have either died or been seriously hurt if I'd stayed sitting there. Story 14. I used the gonna puke thing in a club. Not a kidnap/hostage situation per se, but definitely one where I needed to get the F away from someone who had other plans. I'd been cornered up in a booth by a man who was easily twice my age, and I had this weird, if I was even a little more drunk than this, I'd do something stupid, awareness that sobered me up a few degrees. Then, in the same breath, he tried to persuade me again to go home with him. He told me that I reminded him of his 15-year-old daughter. He faked like I was going to throw up in his lap. He let me go, and I hid in the restroom for a few minutes before I came out and went looking for my DD, who was fortunately my very large ex-Marine brother. The guy saw me, came toward me, took one look at my brother, and disappeared into the crowd. So yeah, it's seriously effective. That was also the last time I ever had more than 1 or 2 drinks. Shudder.
Folks, it can be unfortunately dangerous out there in bars and clubs and stuff like that, so please do not be afraid to pull a move like this, saying you're going to puke and get out of there. Have, keywords and phrases with friends. If it's a bar that you frequent, have a code with the bartender, a specific drink or something that you order. There are so many things that you can do to protect yourself, and I hate that you have to protect yourself, but you really kind of do, unfortunately.
Story 15. I dodged so many bullets I could call myself Neo by this point. I almost got hit by a roof avalanche as a baby. Almost means I stepped inside the second the snow came crashing down. A few months later, I managed to fall face first into a big cactus we had at the time. I was lucky not to have lost my eyes. Yet another few months later, I lost control of my little bobby car and almost smashed my head into a rock. Mind you, my parents were incredibly careful with me all of the time. This is not on them. I am just a klutz. We had a really bad car accident some years ago. Once we got our things out of the wreck, some days later, the towing guy told us that if we didn't have a Volvo, all of us would have died that night. And, of course, I dodged a bullet, namely a girl. I was madly in love with her, not realizing that she wasn't exactly nice to me and not exactly well-adjusted. Story 16. For story 30, my boyfriend had a slightly similar story. He was in his late teens/early 20s and hanging out with friends. They had been drinking and decided to go to some party to meet up with some girls. Boyfriend and I hadn't met yet. Boyfriend had called shotgun, but another friend stole it from him and he had to sit in the back. Driver ended up losing control on the freeway, and boyfriend, who wasn't wearing a seatbelt, got thrown through the windshield and ended up somewhere on the other side of the freeway. The friend who stole the spot had to have a leg amputated and was never the same afterwards. Story 17. I've literally dodged a bullet before. Aside from that, I can relate to the first story. There was a time in my life I did a lot of nose candy, and prescriptions like oxycodone. Someone gave me a fentanyl patch to try. Luckily, they told me how strong it was and that I probably wouldn't be able to get much business done when high on it. I was running a business at the time and planned on taking it whenever I had a day off that I wasn't planning to leave town. I was so busy that year, the day never came. Toward the end of 2016, I gave up drugs altogether and eventually threw the patch in the trash, not knowing who to sell it to. We all know what fentanyl is now, but at the time, most of us didn't. I just luckily happened not to try it. Story 18. Had a girlfriend in college, and after a few months being together, she strongly suggested I give up gaming as she expected. I refused, and we were done. Found out that she was also seeing someone else prior to this, so that hurt. Turns out her new guy knocked her up, so she was in her second trimester before graduation. She had aspirations to be a doctor, but that all went out the door with the pregnancy. Now she had to take care of a child while I'm still here with upgrades to my gaming setup, now with sim racing. And happily still in a healthy relationship with my fiance due to not having a child early on.
Yeah, there are always kind of, concessions and stuff that you make in a relationship. You're growing together, and ideally, in the end, for many relationships, your goal is to stay together, and sometimes things in your life might have to change. But if you're with someone for a couple months and they start trying to get you to get rid of stuff that you explicitly enjoy, be it a hobby, be it friends or family, stuff like that, that's a pretty big red flag there, folks. So I'm not saying that it has to be a deal ender immediately, but I am saying it should raise some concerns.
Story 19. It's funny to think about now, but mine was also changing career paths abruptly prior to 2020. I was in school to be a mortician, ended up leaving my internship in part to a mental breakdown, and found a job in sales, service, and technical support. I got laid off for 6 months and qualified for CERB. I enjoyed answering emails, getting 6 months to work on me, and was never directly exposed to the virus through work. Even as of now, I haven't experienced any symptoms or ill effects despite the rest of my family having caught it. Story 20. Went to an alien observation tower this weird guy created with 2 friends. We knocked on his door and he let us up and showed us around. He made 3 towers on his property and we also talked about aliens with him. A few weeks later, he was arrested for attempted murder. That really freaked me out. Could have been one of us. Story 21. When we were kids, we played outside all the time and ended up finding out that a serial killer named John Jobert had several times been in the same vicinity looking for his victims, and it was very likely that we had even been near enough to have seen him more than once, and we're very lucky that none of us had gotten left alone. Please leave your story in the comments. I would love to make a video on them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.